Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Savanna Greywind. Savanna Greywind was born on August 9, 1995, in Burke County, North Dakota, to a family with a mix of cultural backgrounds. Her father is of European American descent, while her mother is a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux Indian tribe. Savanna had two brothers, Joy and Casey, and a younger sister, Kayla. Her parents, Norberta and Joe, were proud of their children. The family lived in Fargo, North Dakota, until Savanna was 9 years old. Then in 2005 they moved to Spirit Lake Reservation. Savanna loves nature and animals, especially horses. It was on the reservation that she met her partner, Ashton Matheny, when she was 15 years old. They remained together as they grew older. When it was time for college, the family moved back to Fargo. Savanna found work caring for the elderly at a nursing home. She studied to become a nurse and is preparing to take her exams in September. She was expecting her first child and was excited to start her life with Ashton. They had found an apartment and planned to move in together in early September. However, at the time of her pregnancy, Savanna was staying with her parents on the bottom floor of a 7-unit, 3-story apartment building. The building was also home to Burke Cruz, a 38-year-old woman, and her partner, William Hone, who rented an apartment on the 3rd floor. Brooke's life was deeply affected by a past marked by hardship and complexity. The experiences turned her into a dark and emotionally disturbed person. Brooke had trouble managing her emotions and behaviors, often feeling anxious and angry. Brooke's fascination with mysticism and true crime stories began at a young age. As an adult, she studied the psychology of serial killers and attempted to understand their thought processes. Her writing reflected an obsession with human nature's darker side. Brooke saw two conflicting forces within people, good and bad, but her own life was a testament to the destructive power of unchecked darkness. By the time Brooke was 38, struggling with depression, physical illness, and exhaustion from toxic relationships that included regular physical abuse. Her fear of losing William was exacerbated by her inability to get pregnant. This desperate situation drove Brooke to think about committing a shocking crime, taking the life of a pregnant woman to take the baby for herself. After Brooke's arrest, investigators found a disturbing collection of books and notes in her apartment. The books covered topics such as forensic psychology, obstetrics, and law. Her notes listed items for a birthing kit, including scissors, blades, clamps, gloves, and an infant CPR bag. Brooke also had a stash of oxytocin, a hormone used to induce labor. Brooke grew up in a large family in Bradenton, Florida. Her parents divorced when she was young, leaving her mother to care for 7 children, including Brooke. While her family appeared to be well off, Brooke's diary revealed a difficult childhood that she tried to forget. As she entered her teenage years, Brooke became increasingly troubled and was the only one of her siblings to move in with her father, a man her mother described as a professional criminal. After a difficult period living with her father, Brooke was passed around through various foster families, causing her to lose contact with her siblings. Years later, they would only find out that Brooke had become the mother of 7 children. In 1995, when she was 15 years old, she met Aaron Edwards. 2 years later, she gave birth to her first child in Florida but chose to leave the baby with the father and relocate. Despite a court order to pay child support, Brooke failed to meet her obligations. She would eventually reconnect with her daughter briefly on Facebook when the child turned 14. Brooke worked multiple jobs, including as a waitress at the Chinese Dragon restaurant, a sales representative, and an animal specialist at Petland in Florida. However, her life was further marked by brushes with the law. In 2002, the 23-year-old was jailed in Missouri for document falsification but was paroled on August 31, 2022. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived, as she was rearrested and jailed in Texas for violating her parole. By the time Burke was 27, she married Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota, in 2006. She gave birth to 2 children and worked as an administrative assistant at her husband's carpentry shop. However, Burke had an affair, which ultimately led to their divorce in June 2009. Carl Cruz gained custody of their children, and Burke moved to California without explanation. The only thing she did carefully and diligently throughout her life was to keep diaries, meticulously recording events as they unfolded. After a terrible crime has occurred, the diary was published in the press. The diary told of a string of lovers, home births, and abortions. At first, many of these relationships seem healthy and loving. However, over time, the men in her life begin to control her by making her feel inferior. Burke felt that Carl Cruz bullied and humiliated her, making her feel like a bad and promiscuous mother. Despite these negative feelings, after moving to California and filing for divorce, Burke surprisingly returned to Carl Cruz's house. She then registered on a dating website and started taking psychology classes seriously. Burke met Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, New South Wales, Australia, on the dating site Tagged. Burke decided to move to Australia to be with Andrew. However, before leaving, she was involved in a dispute with Carl Cruz over child custody in January 2012. During the argument, she grabbed a knife and attacked Carl Cruz. The police arrested her and charged her. Although she denied the allegations, she chose not to wait for her court hearing and instead fled to Australia using false immigration documents. Once there, she married Andrew. Andrew's marriage to Burke lasted only 6 months. During that time, he discovered her past, including a previous husband and children in the U.S., as well as fake immigration papers. According to Andrew, Burke threatened him for helping her, prompting him to report everything to the police as a precautionary measure. Andrew remembers their marriage as a time when Burke became intensely interested in crime and the behaviors of serial killers. Burke's interest in crime began as early as 2012, when she was studying psychology in nursing. Her thesis focused on serial killers, and she spent a lot of time reading about them. In total, Burke spent 6 months and 10 days in Australia before returning to the US in October 2012. However, after returning to the US, she became embroiled in a lengthy custody battle for her 2 children. Reconciling with Andrew might have given her a chance to start over, but instead, she met William Hone, a 28-year-old man with a history of child abuse, in late 2012. Burke fell in love with William, a man who had been divorced twice. Despite his troubled past, Burke was optimistic about her new life. She took a job and began to rediscover herself. In 2013, Burke decided to pursue a degree at Minnesota State University, enrolling in courses such as social behavior, psychology of deviant behavior, and research methods. She was particularly drawn to the psychology of serial killers, and her paper on the subject earned her top marks. Burke's relationship with William was loving and kind at first, creating a peaceful home for their children. However, over time, the relationship became codependent, marked by joint substance abuse, and the problem is getting more and more tense. As Burke's relationship deteriorated, her well-being suffered. She began to withdraw from her children, struggled in her job, and became increasingly fixated on her research into the darker aspects of human psychology. In 2014, Burke's life and spirit changed dramatically after a series of terrible things happened to her. The specifics of these things are not disclosed, but they appear to have had a profound and lasting impact on her mental health. Burke suffered a panic attack and was rushed to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. In the following year, Burke's relationship with William began to deteriorate. She expressed her feelings of emptiness in her diary. She felt neglected, which led to her started to isolate herself from others. Brooke's physical and mental health continued to decline, and she was eventually diagnosed with a gallbladder disease. This led to a significant decline in her overall well-being, causing her to become reclusive and rarely leave her house. The situation took a turn for the worse when Brooke's partner, William, became violent. In May 2016, the police responded to a call and found that William had brutally beaten Brooke in the bathroom. He pleaded guilty to assault and was banned from approaching her. However, he failed to comply with the restraining order and was found in Brooke's apartment 6 months later. The relationship between Brooke and William continued, but it was no longer healthy. However, one issue remained: William wanted a child, while Brooke was unable to have one due to a 2011 abortion. In 2017, after a fight, Brooke fabricated a pregnancy to prevent William from leaving her. To convince him, she sent him fake proof, including a false ultrasound picture and a photo of a positive pregnancy test. Brooke found an online recording of a random baby's heartbeat and presented it to William, claiming it was the heartbeat of the child she carrying. In reality, there was no pregnancy. William had already shared with friends and family that Brooke was pregnant, and in an attempt to save face, he pressured her to actually have the baby. Brooke understood William's statement as a final decision and thought he was insisting that they adopt a child from someone else, specifically their pregnant neighbor Savanna, who lived 3 floors below them. Brooke, who had medical knowledge, began making a list of what she needed to induce labor. One Saturday afternoon in August, Brooke deceived Savanna by offering her $20 to model a dress, claiming it was one she was currently sewing. Savanna agrees and goes to Brooke's apartment, unaware of Brooke's true intentions. Meanwhile, Savanna had ordered a pizza, expecting to eat it when she returned home. Savanna did not return home at the expected time. The brother went upstairs to the apartment Brooke's around 2:30 p.m. and heard the sound of a sewing machine, but no one answered the door. A short while later, Savanna's father, Joe, also went upstairs and knocked on the door. Brooke, who was with Savanna, yelled out that they were still working on a dress and that Savanna was trying it on, which is why they couldn't open the door. When Norberta returned home, she found that the pizza was untouched. She texted her daughter several times but received no response. She then went upstairs to the apartment, where a neighbor informed her that Savanna had left a while ago after finishing her dress fitting. Norberta became anxious and searched her apartment. Finding that Savanna's shoes, purse, car keys, and other belongings were still there. Savanna had been experiencing heat and swelling that made it painful and difficult for her to walk, so it was unlikely that she had gone for a walk. Norberta called Ashton Matheny, hoping that he might have picked up Savanna, but he replied that he hadn't heard from her either. Growing increasingly worried, Norberta called the police and began driving around the neighborhood, searching for her pregnant daughter. Norberta was driving and thought that if Savanna had gone out, Norberta would have found her nearby. Later that day, the police searched Brooke and William's apartment because it was the last place Savanna was seen. They allowed the police to enter and didn't interfere, but since the police didn't have a warrant, they didn't check inside closets or behind closed doors. The police informed Savanna's family that since she was considered an adult, she had the right to make her own choices. They also stated that without evidence of a crime, there was no requirement for them to keep the family updated on her situation. The investigators concluded that Savanna had left voluntarily. However, Savanna's family was upset by the police department's apparent indifference to her disappearance. The police searched the apartment 2 more times but found nothing. Later, William would admit that he hid Savanna infant in a suitcase and Savanna's body in a dresser with the shelves removed. 2 days after Savanna's murder, William and Brooke drove to a bridge over the Red River, carrying the dresser with Savanna's body, and dumped it into the water. On August 23, 2017, William's co-workers reported to police that he had mentioned having a baby at home. Around the same time, residents of the apartment building where Williams lived hearing a baby crying from apartment number 5, prompting them to notify the police. With this new information, officers obtained a warrant and conducted a thorough search of the apartment, where they found a live newborn baby girl. Brooke later revealed that Savanna had given her the baby. According to Brooke, Savanna had given birth to the baby just 2 days after she went missing. Savanna had confided in Brooke that she didn't want the baby and had asked for Brooke help in inducing labor. 2 days later, at 3 a.m., Savanna arrived at Brooke's home with the baby in her arms and handed the infant over to her. After Savanna was reported missing, the police took her baby into temporary custody. A few days later, a DNA test confirmed the baby's parentage, and Savanna's daughter was reunited with her father for 3 more days. The police and hundreds of local residents conducted a thorough search of the area. The police asked residents to carefully check their properties, including vacant apartments, dumpsters, and any other hiding for evidence. At a press conference on August 27, the police chief urged the public to help find Savanna. However, just a day later, a fisherman found her body wrapped in plastic on the Red River near Harwood. Savanna was identified by a tattoo on her leg. The police charged Brooke Cruz and William Home with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to kidnap, and providing false information. They admitted to the incident, with Brooke explaining that she initiated the fight by accusing Savanna of taking her cat without permission and mistreating it. The argument turned physical, and Brooke pushed Savanna, who fell and hit her head on the bathroom sink, losing consciousness. Brooke used a knife to remove the baby from Savanna, making a cut from hip to hip. As she did this, Savanna went consciousness. When questioned, Brooke confirmed that William was not aware of the plan beforehand. According to Brooke, William came home, entered the bathroom, and saw Savanna. He asked if Savanna was alive, and Brooke replied that she didn't know. William then left the bathroom briefly, returning in his underwear with a rope. He used the rope to strangle Savanna. After the murder, Brooke and William cleaned the floor and walls, then stuffed Savanna's body into a bathroom closet. When the police arrived, Brooke attempted to remain calm. The officers searched the apartment, but their search was superficial due to the lack of a search warrant. As a result, they did not look in closets or dressers. According to Brooke, the child was under a blanket on the bed next to William during the searches. The child was calm and did not cry, so the child was not discovered. By the time of the third inspection on August 20th, Savanna's body had been moved to a dresser, and the infant was hidden in a suitcase. On August 21st, Brooke and William disposed of a dresser by taking it down the stairs, loading it into their Jeep Cherokee, and driving it to the river. William denied participating in the crime, but admitted to hiding a newborn baby girl and providing false information to police to cover up the crime. Both Brooke and William were set a bail of $2 million, which William thought was an unrealistic amount. Brooke was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although William's participation in the crime was not proven during the trial, he was found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty. A cellmate of Brooke's, Jennifer Robinson, testified against Brooke, claiming that Brooke had confessed to strangling Savanna with a rope after discovering Savanna's affair with William. In May 2019, William was sent to prison. On October 7, 2019, he appealed to the Supreme Court. After a review of his sentence, Judge Olin, who had originally given William a life sentence, decided to give him the longest possible sentence allowed at the time, which was 20 years in prison. Since William had already spent 775 days in prison, he would have to serve more than 7 additional years. Savanna's baby, Hasley, is now 6 years old and attending kindergarten. The Savanna's parents regularly post updates on their public Facebook page about their granddaughter's life. The case has received significant attention, And Norberta believes that her daughter's disappearance was not taken seriously because Savanna was Native American. She thinks that if Savanna were white, her disappearance would have been treated more seriously. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepum, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to 2 of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep, then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the 2 women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, and when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2nd, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle, which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase, without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. Her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day, Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands, a crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canala's arrest, suspicions about Felipe's involvement persisted. Felipe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Felipe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Felipe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Felipe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Felipe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David's secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stopped near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in the late 1980s. Shaninthia's childhood was relatively ordinary. She was a beautiful, slender, curly-haired brunette with a talent for music and a creative spirit. She had a gift for composing songs and singing, which earned her local recognition and fame. Her love for music was just one of her passions. In addition to singing, Shanynthia enjoyed fashion and photography. She was a natural in front of the camera and had an artistic eye for capturing everyday moments. Despite her many creative pursuits, Shanynthia was also devoted to charity and her faith. She regularly attended church and prioritized her family's needs. Her life seemed to be on a promising path, filled with potential and possibilities. Shanynthia was 14 years old when she met Burke Clayton through mutual friends. They quickly discovered common interests and became friends. As they grew older and graduated from high school, their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship. They were perceived as a serious and stable young couple, but had some minor run-ins with the law, including traffic violations and disorderly conduct. In 2008, Burke faced a serious accusation of assaulting a woman, although it was allegedly unintentional. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. That same year, Shanynthia and Burke began living together, and they had a son. Shanynthia took on a caring motherly role not only to their son but also to Burke's 2 children from a previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Burke's mother, considered Shanynthia a part of their family, not just she her son loved. Shaninthia's devotion to her children made her special in Sonia's eyes. Although the relationship between Shanynthia and Burke was short-lived, they maintained some contact after the breakup. In Sonia's opinion, Shanynthia remained a good partner and caring mother to Burke. Shaninthia's marriage to Martin Gardner marked a new chapter in her life. He brought joy and stability, and she won him over with her kindness and love for children. To Martin, Shanynthia embodied feminine tenderness and wisdom. Shanynthia and Martin's life together progressed quickly. In September 2013, they moved into an apartment in southeast Shelby County and started their life together. After their wedding, they welcomed their first child, Telone. The following year, Saya was born, and soon after, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazzie, joined the family. In total, Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, in addition to Shaninthia's child from a previous relationship. For the young mom, her children were always the top priority. She enjoyed her part-time work at the Children's Hospital and was also actively involved in a center that raised funds to support children in need. Helping others was her true calling, and she dedicated her life to it with gratitude. Friday, July 1st, 2016, began like any other ordinary day. At around noon, Shanynthia was speaking with her husband, Martin, over the phone. Her voice remained calm, as it typically was. She told her husband she was going to watch a movie with the kids, giving no indication that anything was amiss on this ordinary day. However, during a quiet conversation between the spouses, a sudden and inexplicable madness took hold of Shanynthia. She grabbed a kitchen knife and entered the living room, where she attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yazzie. The defenseless baby was caught off guard and her life was brutally cut short by the person she trusted most. The eldest child, at just 7 years old, witnessed this horrific scene unfold before his eyes, unable to fully comprehend the tragedy. Panicked and desperate, he fled the house. Shanynthia pursued him, still armed with the knife, intent on continuing her rampage. She chased after Dur, but his terrified screams caught the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors rushed outside after hearing screams and were met with a horrific scene that would haunt them. Shanynthia stopped attacking Dur when she realized she was being watched. However, the horror was far from over. Chania went back inside the house, where her children, Savi and Telone, were waiting. In a state of distress, she went upstairs to the bedroom where the younger children were, marking the end of their innocent lives. The witnesses quickly called emergency services, requesting help for Dur and his siblings. At that moment, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome that awaited the quiet neighborhood. When the sheriff's personnel arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. Inside the house, they found 4 lifeless children, covered in blood. The sight was shocking. Shanynthia calmly called her husband, Martin, and confessed to killing their children. The house was now filled with blood and horror. The investigators had obtained a bloody knife. Chaplains and specialists were called in to provide support to Dur, who had endured unimaginable trauma and required immediate attention. The sheriff's department launched a major operation, cordoning off the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. Shanynthia was taken into custody without bail, and her trial was swiftly scheduled for July 5th. Despite the heinous nature of her crimes, Shanynthia was still a mother and partner, someone who had once nurtured love, care, and joy. A friend of Shanynthia, Michelle Jaiman, actively defended Shanynthia on social media, countering the unjust accusations and emphasizing a key factor: postpartum depression. The case sparked discussions, with Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, noting that mothers killing their children is rare and often linked to mental health problems. Dr. Rissman also highlighted the state's insufficient mental health funding, which frequently leaves families without vital support. Dr. Diane Barnes, a specialist in psychology and postpartum health, clarified the distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She emphasized that these are 2 separate conditions with distinct symptoms. Although the exact nature of Shaninthia's condition required further examination, Dr. Barnes expressed skepticism that a woman experiencing postpartum depression would commit such acts, instead suggesting psychosis as a more plausible explanation. Dur's father did not believe Shanynthia was guilty. Although he was not his son's guardian, he was able to visit him after his relationship with Shanynthia ended, but this stopped in November 2014. He noticed Shanynthia becoming more radical and controlling. His attempts to contact his son were unsuccessful, and he was excluded from his life. Those close to Shanynthia noticed a significant change in her. She began experiencing discomfort, which turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became unpredictable, and some suspected postpartum depression. This was a shock, as Shanynthia was seen as strong and dependable. She had always been in control, but now seemed to be struggling. Shaninthia's sudden change in behavior in March 2015 left many people baffled. At first, her friends and family couldn't understand what was happening. One day, she left work early, picked up her children, and drove them down an unfamiliar road, away from their home. Her husband, Martin, thought she was just going for a walk in a park, which was a normal part of her daily routine, so he wasn't immediately concerned. However, as the hours went by, Shanynthia never came home, which worried Martin greatly. He decided to alert the authorities to look out for his wife, who was driving with their 5 children. Shanynthia drove over 74 miles east, from Memphis to Corinth, but it's unclear why she chose that destination, as she didn't know anyone there. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but the police didn't explain how she ended up there. Shanynthia had superficial cuts on her neck and one wrist. If she had attempted to harm herself, her children were the only witnesses, but they were too young to understand what was happening. Eventually, the authorities brought Shanynthia home. However, her behavior became even more unusual after that. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family, which shocked him, as she provided no details about the supposed threat or who was behind it. There had been no previous incidents of this kind. When Shanynthia was with family and friends, she began complaining about her job and workload, claiming it made her feel terrible. She soon started saying that some co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these strange claims, Shanynthia showed no signs of being violent or abusive towards her children or others. The investigation into Shanynthia Gardner's case proved to be a challenging process. Craig Morton, her defense attorney, opted not to discuss the case with the media in its initial stages, deeming it premature for such comments. During the court hearing on July 5, 2016, Shanynthia remained silent, appearing via video link. Despite being questioned by Judge Lambert, she refrained from speaking. Following the trial, Shanynthia was transferred to the Mental Health Institute. Her relatives attended the courthouse but chose not to speak with reporters. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols intended to file a motion to preserve evidence, including information obtained from social media. January 2017 saw Shanynthia formally charged with 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, another count of aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The investigation into the mysterious and gruesome events continued, leaving the community seeking justice and answers to numerous questions. During the hearing, loved ones of Shanynthia testified about the events of that fateful day. Sonia, Martin's mother, was shocked to learn of the tragedy and rushed to the scene to find her grandson, Dur. Initially, she thought something supernatural was involved, but as the shock wore off, she considered possible motives. Sonia wondered if their potential divorce and fear of caring for 5 children alone might have driven Shanynthia to commit the horrific act. The trial was significantly delayed due to Shaninthia's multiple psychiatric evaluations. However, in 2021, the non-jury trial finally commenced. The defense centered its strategy around Shaninthia's mental illness, while the prosecution acknowledged her condition but argued that she could distinguish right from wrong and understood the illegality of her actions. In December 2021, Judge James of the Shelby County Criminal Court rejected the defense's argument and Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. 2 months later, Shanynthia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, accompanied by her husband Martin. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each murder count, plus 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Shanynthia can apply for parole only after serving 51 years. Considering the 5 years she spent in prison before sentencing, she will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, at the age of 80. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed agreement with the decision, citing that it aligned with their goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Upon hearing the verdict, Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shanynthia would no longer be able to harm any more children. An evening vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers. The gathering was a tribute to the innocent victims, with attendees holding red and white candles and offering prayers for the departed souls. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church emphasized that the vigil marked the beginning of the community's healing process. He noted that those present were united in their desire to support the surviving baby and his father during this challenging time. Dar did not attend the memorial ceremony, with his grandmother Sonia explaining to the media that he was too consumed by anger to participate. The president and CEO of the Children's Hospital where Shanynthia worked extended condolences on behalf of the hospital staff. Martin's colleagues created a social media account to support him with the funeral arrangements for his 4 children. At the ceremony, Martin displayed remarkable strength and dignity in his speech as he shared a few words about his children and family. He concluded by emphasizing that his home was once filled with happiness when his children and Shanynthia were present, and that he would always cherish this memory. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kelsey Smith. Kelsey Smith was born on May 3, 1989, in Overland Park, Kansas. Kelsey was the third of 5 children in a close-knit family. Her parents, Gregory and Missy Smith, raised her alongside her siblings, Steve, Lindsay, Kat, and Zach. Gregory Smith, the family patriarch, was a retired U.S. Navy veteran and had served in the police force for over 20 years. He was enjoying his retirement after a long and dedicated career. Kelsey grew up in a loving family environment, close to all her siblings. Kelsey's mother, Missy Smith, has dedicated her life to health care, working at a local hospital for many years. Despite her busy career, she has managed to balance work and family life well, raising her children and creating a warm family environment. Kelsey has been an active, outgoing, and creative child since she was a child. She enjoyed singing, dancing, and playing musical instruments, which she learned in music school. She was also active in school theater and choir performances. Kelsey is also passionate about sports, especially gymnastics and soccer. She often attends sporting events with her father and brother, cheering on her local team. With a great sense of humor and many talents, Kelsey has left a deep impression on those around her. Her love for animals, which began in childhood, inspired her dream of becoming a veterinarian after college. During her senior year of high school, Kelsey found work at the local symphony orchestra, where she played the clarinet at various city events. Through this job, she set a goal of saving enough money within 6 months to buy her first car, a 1987 Buick Regal. Although her parents were concerned that the car was an older model, they offered to contribute to the cost so that Kelsey could buy a newer car from the family budget. However, Kelsey was determined to buy her first car herself, using only her own savings, so she turned down their offer. The Kelsey family prioritized providing their children with a well-rounded education, focusing on education and personal development. They also instilled in their children a strong sense of discipline. The family had clear rules that everyone followed without exception, including sharing their plans and notifying each other if they would be out late. Kelsey demonstrates her adherence to these rules by being punctual, sharing her whereabouts with her parents and informing them of her social activities. During her senior year, Kelsey began a romantic relationship with John Smith. She describes it as deeply in love and like the relationships depicted in books or movies. They celebrated New Year's 2007 together and have been virtually inseparable ever since. John, who is 1 year older than her, appears to be a responsible and caring partner who treats Kelsey with respect. Both sets of parents approve of their relationship. In May 2007, Kelsey turned 18, graduated from high school, and was accepted into a prestigious university in Kansas to study veterinary medicine. This was one of the happiest times of her life. However, these happy days did not last long. Kelsey attended parties with her classmates to celebrate the end of high school and enjoyed spending time with John. At this point, Kelsey had achieved everything she wanted, got into her dream college, and was in a fulfilling relationship with a wonderful partner who was planning to propose. Her life was bright and happy. However, her disappearance from a shopping mall parking lot on June 2, 2007 changed everything. Kelsey and her boyfriend John were about to celebrate a big milestone, 6 months of dating. To make it special, John planned to propose with a custom-made engagement ring and had booked a romantic dinner for they of them. Unaware of John's plans, Kelsey also wanted to surprise him with a gift. That Saturday, she got ready, drove to a nearby Target Corporation store, and called her mother around 7 p.m. to say she had found the gift but needed a special bag for it. Her mother suggested checking the mall across the street from Target Corporation for a romantic gift bag. Kelsey thanked her mother for the advice and promised to be home soon. John was supposed to pick her up at 8 o'clock. However, after that conversation with her mother never heard from Kelsey again. Kelsey failed to return home. When John arrived at 8 with a large bouquet of flowers, he was shocked and frightened to discover Kelsey's absence. Her parents were equally terrified, as it was unlike Kelsey to ignore phone calls and texts. She had vanished in a busy area during the daytime, and no one had witnessed her disappearance. Kelsey's father and 2 eldest siblings began searching for her. They found her car parked at the Oak Park Mall, which gave them a glimmer of hope that she might still be inside the mall for some unknown reason. However, after thoroughly searching the mall, inquiring with salespeople and security guards, they concluded that Kelsey was not there. Upon returning to the car, they found it undisturbed with no signs of struggle or violence. Kelsey's father, a former police officer, decided not to touch anything to preserve potential evidence, as the car might be part of a crime scene. Kelsey's parents reported her missing to the police the same day, but the police were initially hesitant to start searching right away. They explained that since Kelsey was 18, she wouldn't be considered missing until 24 hours had passed. However, Kelsey's father, who had connections, insisted on an immediate search. He also asked hospitals in the city if a woman matching Kelsey's description had been admitted. That evening, the police interviewed Kelsey's family and John to confirm their whereabouts and rule them out as suspects, a standard procedure in missing person cases. The police also reviewed surveillance footage from the Target store, which showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing, making a purchase, and leaving while talking on the phone to her mother. She was asking her mother about a gift bag and then drove to the Oak Park Mall across the street, as her mother suggested. Kelsey parked her car near the side entrance of the mall, close to the wall. Her car was inspected by experts and appeared to be untouched from the outside. The gift for John was on the passenger seat, and her backpack with personal items, including a tablet and wallet with $300 in cash, was in the back. Since everything was still inside, robbery was quickly ruled out as a motive. It appears Kelsey only left with her credit cards and phone, as everything else was still in the car. There were no signs of struggle, blood, or damage, and the only unknown fingerprint was found on the driver's seatbelt, which did not belong to Kelsey, her family, or boyfriend. The investigation tried to track Kelsey's location through her mobile phone signal, but the device was inaccessible, possibly turned off or damaged. Despite this, it was possible to determine the last known location of the phone to narrow the search area. However, Verizon Communications, the wireless carrier, delayed providing the necessary data for several days. Instead of refusing to cooperate, the company kept promising to look into the matter, which effectively slowed down the process. In 2007, telecom companies were permitted to keep subscriber information from law enforcement, including police and FBI, without a court order. They based this on data protection laws. Not even situations where someone's life was in danger were exempt from this rule. A closer look at surveillance footage revealed a disturbing detail: a mysterious stranger was stalking Kelsey. The man initially did not attract attention because he kept a safe distance and did not interact directly with Kelsey. He was a Caucasian man between the ages of 20 and 25 with dark hair, short and a light beard, wearing a plain white t-shirt and black shorts. He followed Kelsey into the Target store about 30 seconds and continued to follow her from a distance as she browsed the various sections. The surveillance cameras captured his movements, and his behavior was later described by the prosecution as similar to a predator stalking its prey. After Kelsey left the store, the man followed her to the Oak Park parking lot in his Chevrolet truck, waiting until she was alone. It's possible that he overheard her conversation with her mother, as he was standing close by while she was on the phone. This may have allowed him to learn about her plans to visit the nearby shopping center. Unfortunately, Kelsey had parked her car in a poorly lit spot, next to a side door and a storage area, which made it difficult for the cameras to capture what happened next. As Kelsey sat in her car, the man parked his truck beside her and got out, wearing the same white t-shirt and black shorts. The stranger came up to her on the driver's side and, likely threatening to harm her, forced her to get behind the wheel of his Chevrolet. The truck then drove away in an unknown direction. Due to Gregory Smith's connections and experience, he believed that the more attention and coverage the case received, the higher the chances of finding their daughter and bringing the perpetrator to justice. As a result, the story was featured in both national and international media, including the popular show, America's Most Wanted. When surveillance footage showed the stranger following Kelsey, the clearest images of his face were broadcast on the news, urging viewers to come forward if they recognized him. The police received calls from people claiming to have seen the man in various cities and states, although most of these reports turned out to be incorrect. Each lead was investigated. On June 6th, a woman named Mrs. Miggs called the police, stating that she recognized her neighbor, Edwin Hall, from the footage. Initially, she had hesitated to report it due to doubts, but the information about the truck removed her last doubts, as Edwin owned an old 1970s Chevrolet. On June 6, 2007, two significant events occurred in the investigation. The police received crucial data from Verizon Communications about the last known location of Kelsey's phone signal. This information pinpointed a specific cell tower, allowing the police to establish a 1.1-mile search radius to the north. Within 45 minutes of starting the search, Kelsey's body was found in the brush near Longview Lake, Missouri, about 30 meters from where she was abducted. The medical examiners determined that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled with her own belt. Kelsey's body was discovered without clothing, except for the belt used to strangle her. Her body was carelessly discarded in the bushes, partially covered with dry branches. Over the 4 days it lay exposed to the June sun, her remains were severely disfigured by insects and wildlife, making them almost unrecognizable. Despite the state of her remains, the examination confirmed that the body was indeed Kelsey Smith. The second major event on June 6 was the arrest of the main suspect. When police arrived at his residence, he remained calm and acknowledged that his friends called him Jack. He agreed to provide a statement at the police station. During the interrogation, Edwin Hall claimed he had never seen Kelsey before, even when shown a photograph of her. When presented with surveillance footage from the store that showed him following her, he insisted that he had only visited Target for personal reasons and hadn't noticed her. He suggested that their appearance together in the footage was just a strange coincidence. Despite being shown irrefutable evidence, Edwin seemed confident that he had covered his tracks and couldn't be held accountable. He had thoroughly cleaned his van and had used protection during the assault, leaving no DNA evidence behind. However, Edwin agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provided his DNA sample and fingerprints. A crucial piece of evidence emerged when his fingerprints matched those found on Kelsey's car's seatbelt buckle. A thorough search of his home also revealed a hidden air pistol with Kelsey's DNA on the barrel. Edwin was officially charged with abduction, assault, and murder. A jurisdictional issue arose, as Kelsey was abducted in Kansas but her body was found dead in Missouri. This was important because it affected the potential sentence. In Missouri, Edwin faced the possibility of a capital punishment trial and sentence. Edwin realized the seriousness of his situation and, after consulting his lawyer, decided to confess to the crime and provide details in the hope of a reduced sentence. He described how he had noticed Kelsey entering the store and followed her, getting close enough to overhear her phone conversation about visiting the shopping center across the street. Edwin waited until Kelsey was alone, then followed her to the adjacent parking lot. He was pleased when she parked in a secluded spot near the side entrance. He got out of his vehicle, armed with a pistol, and waited for Kelsey to return to her car. As she was getting into the driver's seat, he prevented her from closing the door. Kelsey had already pulled out the seatbelt, and Edwin allowed her to buckle up, leaving his fingerprint on it. Edwin then put the pistol barrel in Kelsey's mouth, threatening her to move to his vehicle's driver's seat. Kelsey drove Edwin's truck while he aimed the gun at her and gave her directions. When they reached a remote area at the state border, Edwin ordered Kelsey out of the truck and led her into the bushes. There, he assaulted and strangled her with the belt, then covered her body with branches. He thoroughly cleaned his truck to eliminate any evidence of Kelsey's presence, including fingerprints and DNA. He then hid the pistol, which had Kelsey's saliva on it, in his home, believing it would never be discovered. When questioned about his motive, Edwin failed to provide a clear answer, instead making a comment about the victim's physical appearance. During the investigation, several other women and girls came forward, revealing a pattern of abuse and harassment by Edwin. Further investigation uncovered more instances of Edwin's wrongdoing, including coercing a 14-year-old neighbor into intimacy, harassing a waitress, and fleeing a restaurant without paying. These findings led to additional charges, including corruption of a minor, harassment, and theft. Edwin's lawyer attempted to garner sympathy from the court by highlighting his client's troubled childhood, past victimization, and unstable upbringing. Despite these efforts, the defense was unsuccessful. Edwin's lawyer was the only person to speak in his defense and show support. Notably, Edwin's wife attended all court hearings but chose not to defend her husband, instead sitting quietly in the background. On September 16, 2008, a Johnson County judge sentenced Edwin Hall to 27 life sentences without parole. After hearing the verdict, the defendant apologized to the Kelsey family for his actions and broke down in tears. He is now serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Banaz Mahmud. Banaz Mahmud was born on December 16, 1985 in Iraq. She comes from an Iraqi Kurdish family with strong religious traditions. Her parents, Mahmud Babakar Mahmud and his wife, had 6 children, 1 son, Bahman, and 5 daughters, Baza, Beel, Han, Jaban, and Banaz. They lived in a rural tribal area in Iraqi Kurdistan, adhering to traditional values, especially regarding women's roles. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family moved to the UK. However, this change in location did not alter their deeply held religious and traditional views. Despite being in a more liberal European country, the family continued to reject modern opinion and lived within their tight-knit religious community. At 17, Banaz was forced into a marriage with a man 10 years her senior, who had recently arrived from Iraq. He did not speak English and lacked basic literacy skills. Banaz having met her future husband only 3 times before the wedding. Banaz, described as a girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a kind smile, followed tradition and moved into her new husband's home, despite him being a stranger to her. From the start, Banaz suffered physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her husband. Despite having lived in the UK and being aware of her rights, she was trapped in a cycle of violence. She tried to leave her husband multiple times, but her family forced her to return, as it was considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmoud family. With no support from her relatives, Banaz turned to the police twice, but they failed to take action, leaving her vulnerable to further abuse. In July 2005, after 2 years of marriage, Banaz finally escaped her husband's house and returned to her parents' home. After leaving her husband, Banaz felt a sense of freedom. She met Ramith Soleimani, and they fell deeply in love. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret. They would only communicate twice a day, exchanging messages in the morning and evening. Ramith was unlike the men surrounding Banaz, as he was calm, wise, and courteous. He treated she with great respect and kindness, instantly winning her heart. Before long, they began envisioning a future together, discussing wedding plans and a happy family life. They even chose names for their potential children. These joyful dreams brought Banaz happiness and gave her the strength to cope with the hatred and aggression from her family. In early October 2005, Banaz was walking down the street when she noticed a car following her. She recognized the people inside as Kurdish migrants sent by her father. Knowing her family's history, Banaz became terrified for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz visited the police station again. During a 2-hour conversation, she shared detailed information about her life with her husband, including the physical abuse she suffered, her family's resentment, and the recent surveillance. She told the police that her husband had repeatedly beaten her, and during one incident, he nearly knocked out her tooth because she dared to call him by his first name in public. Banaz had previously informed the police that she feared for her life, but her concerns were ignored. The police failed to investigate her claims, neglecting to interview her family and husband to verify the accuracy of the information. She was told to contact them again if she felt threatened. Banaz and her boyfriend, Ramith, secretly met for about 2 months without being detected. However, in early December 2005, they were spotted by members of her family near a London subway station. This information was immediately reported to her father. That evening, her male relatives gathered at the family home, where they discussed her actions and deemed them unacceptable. Her uncle, Ari Mahmoud, declared that Banaz should be killed to restore the family's honor. Banaz overheard this conversation. Following this, Banaz went to the police again and explained that she had been under surveillance for months. She also told them that her family intended to kill her. She provided a list of 5 family members who were involved in the plot, but the police did not take her seriously. A serious mistake was made, which led to Banaz's disappearance. To uncover her fate, investigators must untangle a complicated network of lies, violence, and disregard for the truth. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father deceives her into visiting a relative's house, promising to discuss her divorce. Upon arrival, he forces her to drink brandy and leaves her alone in a room with the TV on. As she turns around, she sees her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing her life is in danger, Banaz rushes to the front door, but it's locked. To escape, she breaks a window, cutting her hands on the shards. Banaz manages to reach a nearby cafe, where she collapses. Paramedics arrive and take her to the hospital, where the police are called. When Banaz regains consciousness, she contacts Rameth and asks him to come. After being discharged from the hospital, Banaz moves in with Rameth Soleimani. They celebrate the start of 2006 together and are happy. However, by mid-January, the Mahmoud family begins to pressure Banaz to return home, supposedly to mend their relationship and discuss her marriage to Rameth. Banaz trusted her parents and agreed to return to her father's house, believing her mother would protect her if her father became violent. To be safe, Banaz went to the police station again and gave a full statement, including the names of people she thought might harm her. Despite her fears, she returned to her family home. On January 22, 2006, Rameth was attacked by 3 men in the street who tried to force him into a car. He managed to fight back and reported the incident to the police. 2 days later, Rameth and Banaz were due to give a statement at the police station, but Banaz failed to appear. Rameth attempted to reach Banaz Mahmoud, but lost contact with her after she vanished upon returning to her family's residence. Rameth, who had been in constant touch with Banaz, grew increasingly worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. After numerous appeals, the police finally took action. The disappearance of Banaz Mahmoud sparked an investigation led by the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, with Chief Inspector Caroline Good at the helm. Initially, it was suspected that Banaz was being held captive in a house within the community. To locate her, Inspector Good organized an extensive search of linked to the Mahmoud family. Banaz's father, uncle, and ex-husband were brought in for questioning as suspects. The police also began searching for 3 other men listed by Banaz in December 2005, Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Mohammed Hama, all of whom were her cousins. However, when the police searched the neighborhood and tried to question her family members, and the family refused to cooperate with the investigation into her disappearance. Police found no photos of Banaz at her family's home, and her family's complete lack of concern shocked officers. Caroline Good then focused on 30 individuals, all of whom were arrested and questioned. During the investigation, over 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones were seized from those involved. Every person questioned attempted to hinder the investigation, providing conflicting accounts of Banaz's whereabouts. Some claimed to have seen her after she went missing, while others, including her mother, refused to cooperate with the police. Some even suggested she was in hiding. Realizing that no one would cooperate voluntarily, Caroline Good obtained permission to bug the cells of those arrested. At that point, Banaz's father, her uncle, and Mohammed Hama remained in police custody. 2 other men under investigation had managed to escape to Iraq. The detectives were horrified when they received the initial wiretap results. Not only did the 3 arrested men show no remorse, but they also took pleasure in recounting the details of Banaz's death. Their conversations revealed that on January 23, the Mahmoud family intentionally left their home, allowing Omar Hussein and Hama to enter. Once inside, they attacked Banaz, subjecting her to a 2-hour ordeal of beatings and violence. As the torture came to an end, Hama wrapped a cord around Banaz's neck and strangled her. When recalling the final moments of Banaz's life, Hama couldn't contain his laughter. However, it was Mohammed Hama's admission of being present when Rameth was threatened that became the turning point in the case. While Hama was being held in a cell awaiting trial, his phone conversations were secretly recorded. Caroline Good listened to these recordings with growing horror as the suspect proudly described the gruesome details of the murder. In the recordings, Hama provided a detailed account of what they did to Banaz. Despite being terrified and vomiting, Banaz remained silent. Hama then wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times, pulling it so tight that it dug into her skin. As he continued to speak with excitement, He placed his feet on her back and pulled and tugged on the rope. Banaz clung to life until her last breath. It took the perpetrators over 30 minutes to kill Banaz. The brutality of the crime was too much for Caroline Good and the detectives, and they couldn't hold back their tears. Banaz's cousin, Dana Amin, 30, was present in the house and helped the perpetrator put Banaz's body in a suitcase. Muhammad Ali then dragged the suitcase out of the house to a waiting car nearby. Halma revealed that a police car drove by, but the officers didn't notice the suitcase, which had hair and an elbow protruding from it. The very people meant to protect Banaz were involved in plotting her murder. They strangled her with a shoelace, stuffed her body into a suitcase, and took it outside of London. Snippets of conversation mentioned a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good used the information gathered and matched it with the movement data from the arrested suspects' phones to identify the search area. Due to the vastness of the area, the search could have taken a long time. During a conversation with the suspects, one of them suddenly turned to the other and asked if they had put the freezer back where it originally was. This sparked an idea for Caroline Good, now knew what to look for. A police helicopter was deployed to scan the area and spotted a house with a backyard filled with trash, including a white oblong object resembling a freezer that stood out among the black garbage bags. Upon closer inspection of the suspicious house, the officers' suspicions were confirmed. The police officers began digging, but as the hole reached shoulder depth, they were on the verge of giving up, all except Caroline Good. She recalled the words of Mohammed Hama, who had boasted to relatives that he had buried the victim so deep that she would only be found with the help of an informant. Caroline Good convinced the team to extend the search for another day. On the evening of April 28, 2006, their persistence paid off, and the suitcase was finally found. Unfortunately, Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, making it necessary to rely on dental records and DNA samples for identification. Her body was discovered folded into a fetal position, hidden in a suitcase and buried beneath a freezer in the garden of a Birmingham house. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were formally charged with the crime. However, they displayed no remorse, convinced that their actions were justified. Mohammed Hama even claimed that the case would not go to trial, as he believed he was simply carrying out an act of retaliation. Meanwhile, Caroline Good faced renewed opposition from the Kurdish diaspora community. Following the discovery of Banaz's remains, numerous individuals came forward to provide alibis for the suspects, claiming that they were in public on the day of the alleged and therefore could not have committed the crime. Approximately 50 individuals were involved or connected to Banaz's death in various capacities. Reflecting on the events, Caroline Good recalled feeling intense anger, disgust, and contempt for the men involved. She noted that 50 men had participated in the murder of one woman, and they took pride in their actions, which they saw as a demonstration of their masculinity. In March 2007, the trial against Mahmoud Babakar Mahmoud, Ari Mahmoud, and Mohammed Hama began at London Central Criminal Court. Prosecutor Victor Temple described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution that was orchestrated by the victim's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury delivered finding all three defendants guilty of the charges and ineligible for leniency. The sentences handed down were severe. The father received a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years, the uncle was given life with a 23-year minimum, and cousin Mohammed Hama also received a life sentence with a minimum term of 17 years. Judge Brian Barker was scathing in his delivery of the verdict, stating, "He decided that your so-called family honor needed to be restored, which meant she had to die and her memory erased. This is a heinous and heartless crime. What kind of honor is it when a father prioritizes his social status over the life of his own child?" A mere 4 months after the trio's conviction, London police were informed that Muhammad Ali had been arrested in Iraq for a crime committed against a young boy. Muhammad Ali had taken his own life. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 perpetrators, had been hiding in rural Iraq, attempting to avoid public detection. However, in December 2009, he was shot in the leg during an altercation with one of his brothers and required medical attention. Upon arriving at the hospital, police were notified and subsequently arrested him. Initially, Omar Hussein denied being in London in 2005, thereby claiming innocence in Banaz's death. But UK Social Security records revealed that he had been receiving refugee benefits during that time, contradicting his statement. The court ultimately sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin was given an 8 years prison sentence for his role in disposing of Banaz Mahmoud's body and hindering the investigation. A recorded interview with Banaz at a police station implicated her family in the crime. Banaz had previously handed in a letter to a police station in South London, naming individuals who threatened to kill her and her boyfriend Rameth. The individuals named in the letter were from Banaz's family and the wider Iraqi Kurdish community. They were angry about her decision to divorce her husband, who treated her poorly. Despite several attempts to leave him, Banaz returned due to family pressure. The police failed to respond properly to Banaz's situation, which ultimately resulted in her death. However, this case prompted significant changes in how honor-related cases are handled. An inquiry into police misconduct was launched after Banaz's death, and an independent commission investigated 9 police officers for their inadequate response to her allegations. 7 officers received reprimands, and 2 were dismissed. It is essential to recognize the tireless efforts of Caroline Good and her team, who successfully located Banaz's body, secured the conviction of her father and uncle, and brought the escaped perpetrators back from Iraq. Banaz was laid to rest at the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service was held in her honor on June 26, 2007, at the MN Auditorium, followed by the installation of a granite memorial headstone at her gravesite. The memorial was attended by a small group of people, including Rameth Soleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters. Notably, Banaz's family did not attend either service. Rameth Soleimani, who had been living in the UK under witness protection, was profoundly affected by Banaz's death. He penned a heartfelt letter expressing his love and grief, describing Banaz as the love of his life and his entire world. Unfortunately, his pain and suffering continued, and in May 2016, 10 years after the tragedy, he took his own life. This was his 3rd attempt to end his life, a devastating consequence of the trauma he had endured. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nancy Paula Reyes. Nancy Paula Reyes Gores was born on April 13, 1991, in the small village of Granados in Guatemala. She grew up in a poor family with 4 siblings. Her parents, Jorge and Pren Gorzi, worked hard to provide for their children's education, hoping they could have a better life. Nancy attended school and later enrolled in the university in Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was an exceptionally diligent student who earned top academic accolades. Despite her academic success, she struggled to find a promising career. During her studies, she worked as a cashier in a supermarket and was later promoted to administrator, but her career advancement stopped there. During her university years, Nancy was in a relationship with a young man and had 2 daughters. However, the relationship didn't work out, and they separated. The father did not financially support his children. Nancy continued to live with her parents, working at a supermarket, but saw no future prospects. With barely enough money for essentials, change was necessary. In 2013, her older sister moved to the United States, found a good job, got married, and settled well. Inspired by her sister's success, Nancy decided to transform her life. She chose to relocate to Europe, specifically Spain. At the time, she couldn't afford a one-way plane ticket or initial expenses. Nancy worked hard for years, saving enough to make her dream a reality. In July 2018, Nancy bought a ticket to Madrid, reassuring her parents that she would stay in touch regularly. Upon arrival, she planned to secure housing and a job. She brought a few thousand euros to cover initial expenses, such as renting a room and basic necessities, until she found stable employment. When Nancy left, she was 27 years old, and her daughters, who remained with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. However, Nancy didn't stay in Madrid for long. She moved to Barcelona and later to Cadril, a city in the Spanish province of the same name. Nancy maintained regular contact with her family, calling home almost daily to check on their well-being and sending money back to support them. Despite not having a stable job, Nancy managed to make a living through various odd jobs, including cleaning for affluent families and caring for the elderly and sick. She never complained about her hardships. Instead, she told her family that Europe offered better opportunities and that she could earn more than she would have in her home country, even if she worked non-stop with no days off. It seemed Nancy was content with her lives. She even mentioned plans to bring her daughters to Spain once she had saved enough to rent a spacious home for the whole family. A significant romance developed in Nancy's life. Initially, she didn't reveal much about her personal life, citing a busy work schedule. However, in the spring of 2020, she told her parents that she had met a man named Carlos Andres Bustamante and started a romantic relationship with him. They met by chance while Nancy was searching for a new place to rent. As they navigated their challenges, they grew closer and eventually moved in together. Carlos, who was a year older than Nancy, didn't have a steady income at the start of their relationship and relied on odd jobs to get by. As a result, Nancy became the primary breadwinner, covering housing costs, bills, and often providing Carlos with money for his personal expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so they believed everything was fine and that she had found a good partner in Carlos, with whom she lived a happy and fulfilling life. Around that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers also moved to Spain, and she kept in touch with them. She was especially close to her youngest brother, Dennis, who had met Carlos and thought he was likable. In late June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to relocate to Santander, a coastal city in northern Spain. When Nancy spoke to her family on the phone, she mentioned that the climate was better and there were more job opportunities. However, issues began to arise in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried to keep to herself. Carlos was jealous, hot-headed, and cruel. He was content with being financially supported by Nancy and lacked ambition. What's more, he had a problem with alcohol and occasionally used illicit substances. Although he frequently promised to quit and find a stable job, Nancy started to doubt whether she should continue the relationship. When Nancy discovered she was pregnant, Carlos seemed overjoyed and promised a better life. However, his behavior worsened. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from Nancy or his mother. Carlos also started physically abusing Nancy, who tried to hide this from others. On August 12, while Nancy video chatted with her parents, Carlos yelled at her, demanding that she tell him who she was talking to. Despite her explanation, he snatched the phone, verified the caller, and then threw the phone onto a chair before walking away. The next day, Carlos repeated this behavior, grabbing the phone from Nancy while she spoke to her family. He insulted and threatened her, leaving Nancy frightened. However, she told her relatives that Carlos's behavior was due to jealousy and insisted that everything was fine. Her parents urged her to contact the police, but Nancy believed she could handle the situation herself. On August 17, Nancy had a concerning phone conversation with her sister. She stated that if anything happened to her, Carlos would be responsible. Although her words were alarming, she didn't explain further and instead asked her sister to care for her children if necessary. This was the last time Nancy's sister heard from her. Nancy, who was pregnant, mysteriously vanished on August 20th. At around 2 p.m., she texted her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did. It was unusual for her not to follow through on her promise or respond to her family's calls. When her family tried to contact Carlos, he didn't answer his phone either. The situation was worrying, especially since they had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there. Nancy's brothers lived on the other side of the country, making it difficult for them to check on her immediately. A few days later, a suspicious message was sent from Carlos's phone, stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to separate. According to the message, Nancy had packed her belongings and left to find her own apartment, was ignoring Carlos's calls, and he had no idea where she was. Nancy brothers suggested that Carlos come to Ciudad Real so they could report Nancy missing to the police together. Carlos agreed but didn't show up or file the report. He also stopped communicating with Nancy's family. Nancy's relatives reported her disappearance to the police themselves. Meanwhile, her brothers found Carlos's mother's, Sandra Bustamante, address through Nancy's friends. When they visited Sandra and explained the situation, she burst into tears. She confessed that she suspected her son was capable of harming Nancy, but didn't provide any details. Sandra didn't know where Carlos and Nancy were. Carlos wouldn't answer her calls, only sending brief messages telling her not to ask questions and to give him time. The next day, Sandra is questioned at the police station about Nancy's disappearance and the whereabouts of her son, Carlos. Sandra shared the same information she had told Nancy's brothers the day before and showed the police a long text message Nancy had sent her before she went missing. In the message, Nancy begged Sandra not to give Carlos any money, no matter what sad stories he might tell her. Nancy said Carlos would spend the money on alcohol and drugs, which made him aggressive and cruel. He had no intention of finding a job or overcoming his addictions, and his behavior was becoming increasingly threatening. As a result, Nancy was considering leaving him and thought it would be better to end things before anyone got hurt. The investigation also uncovered a disturbing fact about Carlos. He had been convicted of causing physical harm several times before. One of his first victims was his own mother, whom he severely beat when he was 17 years old. At the time, he was given probation. However, after leaving his family's home, he served short sentences for assaulting women he lived with and tried to have relationships with. The investigation was just getting underway, but within the first few days, several intriguing details came to light that suggested the union between Carlos and Nancy was troubled from the start. Carlos had a history of aggression, was unemployed, struggled with addiction, had a criminal record, and was prone to uncontrollable rage. Nancy's occupation wasn't as straightforward as she claimed. Her work generated substantial income, more than a housekeeper or caregiver could earn. In reality, Nancy offered escort services to wealthy individuals, including Spanish and other tourists, which is why she moved to Santander. Carlos initially accepted Nancy's occupation as it supported them financially. However, upon learning of her pregnancy, he became consumed by doubts about the child's paternity and grew intensely jealous of her continued work. His behavior became erratic, fluctuating between forbidding her from interacting with men and pressuring her to work for money. The man spent the money he took from his mother solely on himself and his vices. A disturbing discovery was made in a rented apartment, where Nancy and Carlos had been missing for nearly a week. Although Carlos had been in contact, he only sent messages and didn't reveal his location. On August 26th, the police finally obtained a warrant to search their empty rental apartment in Santander, and what they found was shocking, leaving no doubt that Nancy was deceased. Blood was found throughout the apartment, with some attempts to clean it up. However, it was still visible in many areas. Further investigation revealed fragments of bones, hair, skin, and internal organs in the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet. Forensic analysis confirmed that these remains belonged to the missing woman, Nancy. Although Nancy's body was not found in the apartment, evidence suggested that she had been brutally murdered and dismembered in the bathroom. Her remains were likely disposed of elsewhere. Carlos became the prime suspect in the case, but his whereabouts were unknown. A package for a small hatchet was found in the apartment with Carlos' clear fingerprints on it. Security footage from a local hardware store showed Carlos purchasing the hatchet, rubber gloves, and large trash bags on August 20th. He bought a small cart from an elderly vendor, who instantly recognized him from a photo. This led to his arrest and the start of a search for the body. The next day, Carlos went to a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had no involvement, stating that he and Nancy had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left the town in an emotional state and was unaware of any events involving Nancy afterward. He suggested that Nancy might have been attacked when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. However, his story was unconvincing, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet packaging. In the following days, police thoroughly searched nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline with the help of dogs, but found no sign of Nancy. They then tracked Carlos's movements from August 20th to 26th using his mobile phone signals. The results showed he spent 3 days traveling along the coast, visiting the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was evident that Carlos attempted to conceal his actions. The investigation continued in Santander. On August 20th, surveillance footage revealed Carlos walking towards a large natural forest park in the evening. He returned to his apartment late at night and then exited again with a cart containing irregularly shaped bags. Carlos vanished from view upon entering the wooded area due to limited camera coverage. He reappeared later with a much lighter cart. After proceeding towards the railway tracks, he returned significantly lighter, indicating where the body might be. However, one question remained unanswered: where was the child? It wasn't until September 16th that authorities discovered bags containing severely decomposed human remains in dense underbrush on a hillside. The remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gores, which had been divided into 20 parts using a hatchet, as revealed by security camera footage. While all items transported in the cart were recovered, something was still missing. Nancy's 4-month-old fetus was not found among the remains. The victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed severe injuries from a knife and hatchet. This suggests that the perpetrator removed the fetus and got rid of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos denied being involved and gave conflicting statements. He tried to blame someone else, but the victim's blood was found on his clothes and shoes, which he had tried to wash off. Even though Carlos wouldn't admit to the crime, investigators figured out what happened. Experts think that on the afternoon of August 20th, the man got into an argument with his pregnant partner. He then brutally beat and strangled her in the kitchen, where blood was found on the floor and walls. Carlos moved Nancy's body to the bathroom. Afterward, he went shopping at a hardware store and the market. Using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts in the bathroom. He placed the pieces into bags, loaded everything into a cart, and then went to the park to look for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. During his trial, Carlos denied his guilt and claimed he loved Nancy. The whereabouts of the fetus he removed from her body remain unknown. From the time of the crime until his arrest in Madrid, Carlos lived off the money he stole from Nancy. He spent the money daily in bars across various cities. It took law enforcement nearly 2 years to investigate, gather evidence, and find witnesses, and the murder trial is scheduled to start in July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Carlos received a prison sentence of 25 years and 6 months. He was also required to pay €150,000 in compensation to Nancy's parents and daughters. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Wayfair Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, they are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ilana Frick. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, to George and Anna, who had immigrated to Canada from Croatia in the early 1970s. She was the younger of 2 daughters, with an older sister named Caroline, with whom she was extremely close. Ilana's birth was considered a miracle by her parents. Her mother, Anna, had faced serious health complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had told them that Anna would likely never conceive again. Anna and George made a significant effort to ensure their daughter's well-being and meet their needs, in spite of the difficulties they faced. They both worked at a car factory, striving to give Ilana and Caroline a good education and a comfortable life. Growing up, Ilana was a diligent and passionate student. She spent most of her free time reading, also found time to attend dance classes, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field events. During her summer breaks, Ilana chose to work to help support her family, often working in cornfields and learning to manage her finances wisely. As she progressed through school, Ilana excelled in math and science, and by the time she reached high school, she had set her sights on a career in medicine. Ilana graduated at the top of her high school class and was accepted into a prestigious medical university. Around the same time, she started dating Matthew Ryan, a classmate from high school who was also studying in the same department. They maintained a long-distance relationship after graduation, with Ilana moving to Ottawa to pursue a residency program at the university. Matthew, on the other hand, chose to work at a local hospital and did not pursue further education. Despite the distance, Ilana and Matthew's relationship continued until nearly 2002. They had even made plans to get married, but ultimately decided to remain friends. By then, Ilana was interning at a top clinic and was working towards earning a doctorate, while Matthew's career had not advanced. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Ilana met Mohammed Shamji, a new colleague. She was immediately drawn to him. Mohammed, who was just a year older than Ilana, was a resident in the neurosurgery department and came from a family of prominent doctors. Mohammed Shamji was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, into a family of medical professionals. His father, Farid Shamji, was a well-known surgeon, and his mother, Edith, was a talented psychiatrist. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, also pursued a career in medicine, becoming a medical biophysicist. Both brothers attended Yale University, and later, Mohammed returned to Canada to earn his doctoral degree from the University of Western Ontario. Additionally, Muhammad had taken an interest in a blonde woman, but at first, he did not make any attempts to approach her. Ilana was immediately drawn to Muhammad, a tall, dark-skinned man, and sought to capture his attention. He eventually asked for her number and initiated contact, marking the beginning of their romance. Initially, Ilana perceived Muhammad as a reserved individual who hesitated on dates, jumped between topics, or fell silent, giving the impression of being introverted. However, it was later discovered that his behavior was not due to shyness but rather a lack of interest. Unbeknownst to Ilana, Muhammad was seeing another woman at the time and intentionally kept this a secret. When Ilana discovered she had a rival, she became resolute in her determination to be the only woman in his life. The first year of their relationship was tumultuous, with they breaking up on 3 separate occasions, rekindling. This was largely due to Ilana's persistence in pursuing the relationship. Despite her parents' awareness of the issues and their encouragement to leave Muhammad, Ilana remained resolute, convinced that she had found her soulmate. Ilana often showered Muhammad with gifts, surprises, and home-cooked meals, but he only sporadically reciprocated her affection. Muhammad seemed content to accept Ilana's displays of love without feeling obligated to return them. This dynamic created an emotional imbalance, where Ilana grew increasingly dependent on Muhammad. In the summer of 2004, Ilana and Muhammad received unexpected news: Ilana unplanned pregnancy. A sudden life-changing event forced them to rethink their future plans. While both were anxious about the news, Muhammad felt a strong obligation to marry Ilana before the baby was born, as is traditional in his conservative Muslim upbringing. In September 2004, they had a 2-part wedding. The first ceremony adhered to Muhammad's family's cultural customs, while the second was a more casual celebration with friends at a popular restaurant. At the time, the newlyweds seemed happy and in love. However, their happiness was short-lived. When their daughter, Yasmin, was born in January 2005, their marital problems became apparent. Muhammad's focus on his career and education left Ilana and their newborn daughter feeling neglected. To make matters worse, Muhammad had been hoping for a son and wasn't afraid to express his disappointment. This marked the beginning of a troubled marriage that would ultimately end in tragedy. After having her child, Ilana took maternity leave to care for her daughter and manage the household. When Muhammad returned home, he would often go straight to his room and spend very little time with his wife and children, which left Ilana feeling abandoned and unappreciated. As time passed, Muhammad's behavior worsened, and he became increasingly critical and abusive. He would insult Ilana's appearance, refuse to eat her cooking, berating and insulting his wife. Despite her growing unhappiness, Ilana chose not to confide in anyone, including her close friends and parents, about her marital problems. However, one day, while Ilana was on the phone with her mother, Muhammad returned home in a bad mood and began berating Ilana in front of her mother. Ilana's mother tried to defend her, but Muhammad shifted the blame onto Ilana, claiming she was responsible for their troubled marriage. Ilana's mother advised her to end the relationship with Muhammad and file for divorce, but Ilana declined, hoping that she could still salvage the marriage. Unfortunately, Muhammad's actions worsened, and he started physically harming Ilana on top of the verbal abuse she had already been enduring. The situation reached a boiling point in the summer of 2005 when Muhammad punched Ilana in the face, breaking her nose. Fearing for her safety and that of her child, Ilana fled to friends and reported the incident to the police, finally deciding to end the marriage and leave Muhammad for good. Muhammad surprisingly begged his wife, Ilana, to come back, vowing to never physically abuse her again or even raise his voice. He promised that their family life would be perfect, and he would control his temper. However, Muhammad's sudden change of heart was motivated by self-interest. As a young neurosurgeon, he was about to start at Duke University, working towards his doctorate, and a criminal conviction would ruin his promising medical career. Muhammad's primary concern was his own future, but he successfully convinced Ilana to drop the charges against him. She even agreed to follow him to North Carolina, where he would pursue his studies. Ilana's loved ones were confused when she didn't leave her husband despite the difficulties she was facing. Instead, she moved to another country with Muhammad. When they encouraged her to reconsider, she stood her ground. When the family settled in the U.S., life appeared more tranquil for a time. Muhammad earned a highly competitive spot in an elite engineering program. Meanwhile, Ilana joined Duke University on a full tuition scholarship. Their relationship grew stronger and became more confident in their decision to have more children. After the arrival of their daughter Fiza, they welcomed another child. Unlike their son's relatively smooth birth, Fiza's delivery was more challenging. The new addition to the family brought immense joy, and they felt grateful for their family growing closer. What secrets lay hidden behind the perfect facade of this family? In the late summer of 2009, Ilana and her husband, along with their children, returned to Ottawa, Canada, and settled back into their home. Ilana, however, soon ended her maternity leave and secured a job as a family doctor at a renowned hospital, quickly building a solid reputation. Her husband, meanwhile, juggled work, studies, and teaching at a university. As social media gained popularity in the late 2000s, they started a personal blog that portrayed them as an ideal family. They shared photos of their vacations, accomplishments in science, and luxury lifestyle, complete with a lavish home. They even posted about attending prestigious conferences and trendy resorts. To outsiders, they seemed like a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems. However, this perfect image hid a dark reality. Behind closed doors, Muhammad continued to exert strict control over Ilana. He monitored her interactions, dictated what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods, leaving Ilana feeling silent and trapped. As time passed, the tension and aggression between them became stressed, with Muhammad frequently yelling at Ilana and blaming her for their arguments and discord. In 2011, a prestigious medical center in Calgary offered a talented neurosurgeon, Muhammad, a fellowship in spinal surgery. Muhammad accepted the offer and relocated to Calgary, but he had to leave his family in Ottawa because his wife, Ilana, couldn't take a leave of absence from her job for over a year. They had to manage a long-distance relationship. During one of Muhammad's visits home, their relationship faced its biggest challenge yet. While at home, Muhammad accidentally left his laptop open, and Ilana saw a message from another woman on his social media account. The content of the message implied a romantic involvement. When Ilana confronted Muhammad, he confessed to having an affair, which was a devastating blow to Ilana. Ilana's family believed that this was the final straw, and they were convinced that she wouldn't forgive Muhammad again. However, Ilana decided to give their marriage another chance. Muhammad promised to end the affair, and they decided to start fresh in Toronto, where Muhammad had secured a high-paying job. Despite this fresh start, their marital issues persisted. After their move to Toronto, Muhammad expressed his desire to have a son, and Ilana agreed to try again, hoping that a new child would bring stability to their family. In October 2013, they had a son named Marius, a long-awaited addition to their family. Despite the new baby, his behavior towards his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, he devoted himself to his medical career, becoming a skilled and respected neurosurgeon known for his ability to tackle complex cases that other doctors avoided. Meanwhile, the wife also advanced in her career, becoming a representative for the Ontario Medical Association. However, the tension between them began to escalate, and his behavior towards his wife became increasingly aggressive. He went beyond verbal abuse, resorting to physical violence against her. During a family ski trip, the wife suffered a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, as well as other injuries. She initially claimed that the injuries were a result of a skiing accident. However, she later confided in her best friend that the injuries were actually inflicted by her husband. Following another heated argument over his latest infidelity, Ilana discovered that her husband, Muhammad, was having an affair with a colleague. After overhearing a suspicious phone conversation, Ilana confronted him, which led to a violent outburst, and he physically abused her. A friend, who was aware of the situation, advised Ilana to end her marriage, but she refused. Her friend jokingly suggested that Ilana should retaliate by having an affair of her own. Although the suggestion was made in jest, Ilana might have considered it a viable option to get back at her unfaithful husband. During the summer of 2016, their relationship continued to deteriorate. Their children were away at camp or staying with their grandparents, leaving Ilana and Muhammad to face their marital problems alone. In a surprising turn of events, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary in early September, even sharing the news on social media. However, their happiness was short-lived, as they began discussing divorce just a week later. Despite his marital transgressions, Muhammad refused to acknowledge his actions as grounds for divorce, claiming that he was happy with his current situation. On the other hand, a desperate Ilana initiated an affair with a coworker who had been flirting with her, escalating their relationship turmoil. Elena found herself swept up in a new romance, feeling cherished and adored by her partner. This was a welcome change from her current situation, and she reveled in the long-absent sensation of being loved and desired. However, her personal life was about to take a dramatic turn. A fierce argument erupted in the family on November 25, 2016. Elena informed her husband that their divorce was unavoidable. The following day, she consulted with a divorce attorney and then departed for a 3-day medical conference in another city. While Elena was away, her husband, Muhammad, sent her a series of messages, begging her to reconsider and work on saving their marriage for the sake of their children. Elena returned home on November 30th and made a final phone call to her parents. Although her voice betrayed some anxiety, she reassured them that everything was okay. Unbeknownst to her family, Elena had attempted to call the police that evening, but in her distress, she accidentally misdialed the number, leading to a devastating outcome. On December 1st, Anna tried to contact her daughter Ilana but was unable to reach her. Concerned, Anna called her son-in-law Muhammad to ask what was wrong. Muhammad claimed that Ilana had packed her bags in the middle of the night and left him and their children to be with her lover. However, Anna and her husband were skeptical of Muhammad's story, knowing that their daughter would never abandon her children. They asked a close friend of Ilana's to keep an eye on the Muhammad home while they traveled to Toronto to report Ilana's disappearance to the police. The friend reported that Ilana's car was still parked in the driveway, which only added to the family's concern. When Anna and her husband arrived at their daughter's house, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. However, Muhammad was agitated and insisted that Ilana was with her lover, repeating the same story he had told the police earlier. After Ilana was reported missing, a shocking discovery was made. The police found a body inside a suitcase. A man walking his dog by the river on December 2nd noticed a new-looking suitcase under a bridge about 24 miles from the suspect Muhammad's home. His curiosity got the best of him, so he opened the suitcase, discovering the body of a blonde woman. The police were immediately notified, and the body was taken to the medical examiner for identification and analysis. Fortunately, identifying the owner of the suitcase was not difficult because the perpetrator had left the luggage tag attached, which still had her name and travel information from her recent trip. Her parents confirmed the identity as Ilana. An autopsy revealed her cause of death to be mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. Additionally, her body showed signs of abuse with multiple bruises and abrasions. Notably, the victim was found dressed in pajamas with no shoes. Considering the victim's position in clothes, it appears she was placed inside the suitcase immediately after her death. The investigation led to the suspect's arrest later that evening at a coffee shop. Evidence indicated he was planning to leave the country. A lawyer accompanied the suspect during his meeting at the time of arrest. However, law enforcement thwarted the escape. Subsequently, Muhammad, the prime witness turned suspect, was arrested, formally charging him with Alana's first-degree murder. Muhammad denied any involvement in the incident, but a disturbing detail soon came to light. Their 12-year-old daughter, Yasmin, had unintentionally witnessed her mother's murder. Yasmin reported hearing screams and noise coming from her parents' room, prompting her to rush there. She opened the door slightly and saw her father kneeling behind the bed, while her mother was likely on the floor, out of her sight. Muhammad ordered Yasmin to leave the room immediately, shut the door, and go back to bed. The next morning, he told his daughters that their mother had left. Despite her young age, Yasmin sensed that something terrible had occurred, but she couldn't fathom that her father was responsible for her mother's death. To avoid putting his daughter through the trauma of testifying in court, the accused confessed to the crime. He recounted the events of that fateful evening, stating that he and his wife had argued over her alleged infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed that he didn't intend to harm his wife, but the situation escalated rapidly. The argument turned violent, and when his wife tried to call the police, he knocked the phone out of her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face before pinning her to the floor and strangling her with his hands. Muhammad's daughter entered the room, but couldn't see what had happened behind the bed. By the time Muhammad realized his wife was not breathing, it was too late. In a desperate attempt to revive her, he made a fatal mistake, breaking her neck. Panicked, he placed her body in a large suitcase and drove around for hours, unsure of what to do. Eventually, he stopped at a small bridge over a river and threw the suitcase into the water, hoping the current would carry it away. However, the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation, hidden in the darkness. During the trial of the surgeon, a scandal emerged involving his father, Ferd Shamji. The elderly man made derogatory comments about his deceased daughter-in-law, trying to justify his son's actions by claiming she had been unfaithful and provoked him. As a result, his medical license was revoked. Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder in April 2019 and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he may be eligible for parole in 14 years, considering the time he served during the trial. This means he could be released as early as 2030. Additionally, Muhammad was prohibited from contacting his children or his wife's parents and was ordered to pay them a substantial amount of compensation. His medical license was also permanently revoked, preventing him from practicing medicine or teaching again. The children who have lost their parents are now being cared for by Alana's parents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay Cutshall was born in 1982 in the small town of White Eyes, Ohio, to a devoutly Christian family. Her father was a pastor, and she was raised with strong religious values. Despite her strict upbringing, Lindsay was an adventurous and active child who enjoyed sports and later developed a passion for hiking and extreme tourism. After completing her education, Lindsay attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia, where she honed her outdoor skills. She regularly went on hikes, climbed mountains, and rafted down rivers, often organizing her own expeditions. Lindsay's dream was to establish a summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them wilderness survival skills, rafting, and other outdoor activities. Jason Allen was born in 1978 in Zeeland, Michigan, to a deeply religious family. As a teenager, he became fascinated with hiking and wilderness survival. Jason was a tall, athletic, and charismatic individual who possessed natural leadership qualities, which drew like-minded people to him. He was passionate about exploring new heights and mastering outdoor skills. Lindsay and Jason met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. At the time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. They quickly formed a connection after meeting for the first time, leading the young man to ask for her hand in marriage just 6 months later. Both sets of parents gave their approval, and the young man proposed to his girlfriend with a beautiful diamond ring. Shortly after, he gave her a second engagement ring. As a couple, they made ambitious plans for their future. They intended to get married in September 2004 and buy a spacious house to raise a family. But things didn't turn out as expected. Before their wedding, they worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water in California's El Dorado County. Their goal was to gain experience and eventually open their own camp after the wedding. On the Friday evening of August 14th, Lindsay and Jason decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. Before leaving, they informed their colleagues of their plans and left 2 experienced counselors in charge of the camp, ensuring a smooth transition. They told everyone they would return by Monday, expecting no issues for either themselves or their temporary replacements. With their plan in place, they set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, and unfortunately, this was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, Jason and Lindsay, both counselors, had not returned to camp, but their absence did not raise immediate concern. It was assumed they would arrive late that night or early Monday. However, when they failed to appear at the Monday morning roll call at 8 a.m. and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues grew worried. The group quickly notified the police and then reached out to Jason and Lindsay's families to inform them about the situation. The parents went to the camp right away to get more information about the incident. Their colleagues were particularly concerned because Jason and Lindsay were known for their reliability and punctuality. If they had encountered any issues, they would have likely found a way to communicate. Upon arriving at the camp, law enforcement officials began questioning their colleagues, but the investigation quickly hit a roadblock. No one knew exactly where Jason and Lindsay had gone. They had planned to explore the San Francisco area, but their love for adventure and extreme activities made it likely that they were in a remote location with no access to communication or civilization. The police decided to wait for 48 hours, allowing the missing couple a window to possibly return home by themselves. In the meantime, concerned relatives and friends didn't want to delay any longer, and therefore decided to start searching. They reached out to everyone in their network, trying to gather information about the last time someone had contact with they. A missing person flyer featuring a photo of they was circulated, asking witnesses to report any potential sightings right away. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search. The main focus was on the San Francisco area, its surrounding suburbs, and nearby localities. However, the large terrain made it challenging to thoroughly search every inch. A friend's insight that they frequently visited the secluded and picturesque rocky beaches led the police to concentrate on these locations. As the search effort dragged on for days, with several bodies found in sleeping bags in the targeted areas, the likelihood of finding they alive decreased significantly. On Wednesday, August 19th, a helicopter patrol spotted 2 bodies in sleeping bags on a remote rocky beach, indicating that the individuals were likely deceased rather than just resting. Upon arriving at the scene, police found a red Ford Tempo parked near a tourist shelter and a steep trail leading to a scenic beach. The car was identified as belonging to missing student Lindsay Cutshall after a database check. As officers descended the trail, they discovered 2 people in sleeping bags, who initially appeared to be sleeping. However, they did not respond to calls or noise. Closer inspection revealed that the individuals, a young man and woman, were deceased, with no signs of life. Preliminary examination suggested that they had been killed by gunshot wounds to the head, and the smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for over a day. All of their belongings, including phones, wallets, bank cards, and cash, were found next to them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The car keys were also visible, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators initially believed the deceased were the young couple who had gone missing near San Francisco the previous week. Documents found at the scene confirmed the identities of the victims as Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen. However, formal identification by their relatives was still necessary. When the parents arrived, they were overcome with grief upon recognizing the bodies of their children. The investigation led police to rule out initial theories of robbery or carjacking due to the presence of untouched valuables, money, and keys at the scene. Forensic analysis also showed no signs of physical or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the fatal gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were peacefully sleeping and did not have time to react to the attack. They showed no signs of trying to defend themselves, escape, or even get out of their sleeping bags, indicating a sudden and deliberate act that was similar to an execution or a revenge killing. The brutal murder of two individuals on a secluded beach left investigators with many questions but no clear answers. The beach was difficult to access, and there were no signs of anyone else being in the area. Despite a thorough search, no shell casings were found, leading investigators to believe that the shooter may have taken them or thrown them into the ocean. The fact that the shots were fired at close range into the victim's head suggested that the casings should have been nearby if they hadn't been deliberately moved. A search of the area revealed an empty beer bottle a few meters from the crime scene. This was notable because Lindsay and Jason did not drink alcohol and led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting that the bottle may have belonged to the shooter. The brand of beer was unusual for the area and was more commonly found in a neighboring state. Although it was unclear whether the bottle was connected to the crime, it was considered a significant lead in the investigation. A theory emerged that Lindsay and Jason may have had a confrontation with someone the day before their deaths, and this person may have returned at night with a gun to settle the dispute. Although Jason and Lindsay were known for being friendly, it was possible they may have unknowingly offended someone. Additionally, the shooter may have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. Examination of the bullets found in the victim's skulls showed they came from a rare Marlin rifle, specifically a .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994 by Marlin Firearms Company. This type of rifle was typically used for hunting and was often part of a collector's arsenal. This discovery was a significant lead in the investigation, but it remained the only concrete clue at the time. Investigation suggested that the shooter was likely a lone male. He may have been a hunter, collector, or gun enthusiast. To further the investigation, authorities aimed to reconstruct their final route, identify who they may have contacted, and determine when they were last seen alive. Fortunately, they had taken many photos, and their camera was found intact among their belongings, which provided a useful starting point for tracking their movements. A guest book at a tourist cabin near the lookout point, where they had parked their car, contained entries expressing their delight with the weekend getaway. They had also visited a fishing pier about 20 miles away on Saturday, as evidenced by the photographs they took. Police officers returned to the pier and interviewed locals to find people who may have seen something significant. Several people remembered a young couple in a red car who inquired about overnight accommodations but found all three nearby hotels fully booked due to peak tourist season. They had dinner at a local restaurant, walked around the area, and took photos before leaving in the evening. According to those who saw and interacted with them, they was friendly, did not engage in any conflicts, and seemed carefree and happy. However, none of the witnesses could recall anything unusual or suspicious. The location where the bodies were found was a protected area, closed to camping. However, the young couple had nowhere else to stay overnight, so they decided to camp on the beach, using sleeping bags instead of a tent. They felt safe on the secluded beach on a warm August night and planned to return to the Rock and Water Camp on Sunday. This information helped investigators narrow down the time frame of their deaths. Since they went to sleep but didn't survive until morning, it's likely they were killed between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday. Despite the ongoing investigation and public appeals for information, police withheld certain details, including the results of the ballistics analysis. This action was taken to prevent the suspect from being tipped off and getting rid of the murder weapon before the investigation could start. The investigation first focused on a local homeless man who was known to sleep on the beach where the crime occurred. He was found and questioned by police, but despite not having an alibi for the night of the crime, he was not confirmed to be involved. The main reasons for this were that the murder weapon was never found and his DNA did not match the DNA found on a beer bottle discovered at the crime scene. The case went cold for nearly 2 years, but in the spring of 2006, police decided to release more information about the crime, including details about the weapon used. They also offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and solve the case. Following the public appeal, authorities received over 1,000 calls, but only a few were useful for the investigation. One individual, 26 years old Sean Gallen, drew particular attention from several locals who described him as an aggressive collector of firearms and blades. He was reportedly prone to conflicts, had a history of property damage, and frequently threatened violent behavior. The police investigated Sean Gallen and questioned him because they already knew him from previous incidents involving fights and drunk driving. Upon inspecting his possessions, Sean did possess numerous weapons but did not own the rifle in question. Authorities were unable to verify his whereabouts around the time of the crime due to the year gap, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, forcing his release. Meanwhile, international authorities were investigating another individual, 61 years old Joseph Henry Burgess, who made locals nervous due to his tendency to carry firearms and exhibit aggressive behavior. Burgess was described as erratic, often claiming he received orders from God, sparking suspicion that he could be the perpetrator. Joseph Burgess was living in Canada in the late 1970s, feeling lost and without a clear sense of purpose or direction in his life. In 1978, he joined the Children of God commune, presenting himself as a deeply devoted individual. Those around him considered him excessively zealous. A rivalry with two young members escalated into hostility, and shortly after, both individuals were found dead with multiple close-range gunshot wounds to the head. The circumstances of their deaths were particularly notable. Their bodies were discovered in sleeping bags on a beach, suggesting they were shot while asleep. By the time the authorities arrived, Joseph had disappeared. Although evidence left behind implicated him in the crime, he had already fled to the United States, crossing the border illegally. Joseph managed to evade capture for nearly 25 years until the police linked him to a double homicide in California. However, the opportunity to question him was lost when a shootout occurred during his arrest, resulting in the deaths of both a police sergeant and Joseph, who initiated the gunfire. This ultimately unresolved case remained shrouded in mystery. A 35-year-old man named Seamus Gallen was killed by his younger brother, Sean Gallen. The brothers had gotten into an argument, during which Sean, who was under the influence of illicit substances, shot Seamus 3 times with a gun. Sean had a history with the police, having been previously investigated for a double murder on a beach, but was released due to lack of evidence. Since then, Sean had been in trouble with the law twice for causing property damage and making threats, but only received fines. It was also discovered that Sean was an avid hunter and enjoyed making knives and other bladed weapons. People who knew him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After killing his brother, Sean tried to run away but was caught almost immediately. The police decided to take another look at Sean's possible involvement in a crime that happened 13 years ago. They found useful information on his social media page, where he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and talked about his supposed psychic abilities. According to his posts, Sean believed he was on a special mission and was receiving instructions from outer space. Sean's behavior initially led police to suspect that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke incoherently, and maintained his innocence. A new lead was found by investigators who examined private messages on the deceased brother's social media page, something no one anticipated. In 2006, a $50,000 reward had been offered for information about a double homicide case. Sean's former girlfriend had messaged his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning Sean in. It appeared that both the girlfriend and the brother had knowledge about the case, but they had chosen to remain silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, as the brother had been shot and the girlfriend had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. However, when Sean was shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he made a shocking confession. Despite his initial denials, Sean began to provide a detailed account of the events surrounding the double homicide. His recollection of the details was vivid, even though more than 13 years had passed since the crime occurred. One evening, a man left his house with a Marlin rifle, planning to hunt in a nearby wooded area. However, after wandering aimlessly for a couple of hours, he decided to head down to a nearby beach, which he believed was a good spot to find wild boars. As he walked along the shore, he came across 2 sleeping bags with a young man and woman asleep inside. He stood there watching them for several minutes, when suddenly he heard voices in his head telling him to kill them. The man claimed that this was a mission from outer space that he had to carry out. So, he pointed his rifle directly at the young man's head and fired, instantly killing him. The sound of the shot woke she, but before she could even process what was happening, the man fired again, killing her as well. He then picked up the spent casings and put them in an empty beer can he had been carrying. Later, he threw the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he also hid the rifle, asking his father to keep it for him. Sean's father hid the murder weapon in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Remarkably, Sean's account of the crime was later confirmed. When the barn eventually collapsed, the rifle was discovered at the site, and a beer can with shell casings was still hidden in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The property's abandonment after Sean's father passed away in 2009 had helped preserve these key pieces of evidence. A beer bottle found on the beach was initially considered evidence, but it was later discovered to be unrelated to the crime. Sean claimed that voices in his head ordered him to commit violent acts and that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the crime. His defense argued that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. The court relied on expert psychiatrists to assess the validity of these claims. The psychiatric evaluation found that Sean did indeed suffer from multiple mental health disorders, which were exacerbated by his use of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, the evaluation also showed that at the time of the crime, Sean acted with deliberation and careful planning, fully aware of his actions and the need to cover his tracks to avoid detection. Specifically, Sean deliberately killed the young man first, knowing that she would be less able to resist or defend herself if anything went wrong. Sean carefully removed the casings and handed the rifle to his father, instructing him to conceal it. Although psychiatrists diagnosed Sean with mental issues, they concluded he was mentally fit to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. Notably, his family and former girlfriend were aware of or suspected his involvement in the double homicide, yet none of them reported him to the police. Sean's trial took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the double homicide. On June 17, 2019, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus an additional 94 years for killing his brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for inmates with mental disorders. Due to his continued claims of hearing voices and aggressive behavior, he is closely monitored to prevent harm to himself or others. The motive behind the double homicide was never established. According to reports, Sean randomly encountered they sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives without apparent reason.